am the chosen one. I'm the only man who knows how to and is allowed to perform this sacred task. At 10 p.m. on Tenbruce Drive, I, Christopher Baton, would don the holy traditional garb. A guinea, some blue boxers with the Pillsbury Doughboy on it that says "poke me" in all the wrong, or maybe right, places. And these grandpa shoes right here would grab the leash and the reins of the mighty beast that they call Watson and walk out the door. It was a Zen-like time at twilight. Dim light from a flickering suburban street lamp on the asphalt, the stars up above, and the inevitable fact that I would be picking up shit. I would walk my dog every night down Tenbruce Drive at 10 p.m. But it was more than just my terrier's bathroom break to me. No, this was my only time in a busy life to think and meditate on it. It was my space of prayer in the silent dusk where the thoughts laid heavy on my tired mind. But I've been living, well, here now, and so I've been building up a lot to contemplate and a lot to say. So, like a New Jersey Buddha, hold the spray tan, I want to share with you my thought process. The lessons from my more recent past, which I have meditated on while walking my dog at 10 p.m. Well, this year started off like a dream off of an amazing summer. I was going across state lines with 3 or 4 too many kids for my probationary license to allow with my buddy Jason, our band. And I was really happy. But from this dream, I soon began to wake up. When the fall came, I realized that I just wanted to do right for the prefecties this year, and I wanted to make sure I do my work, so I isolated myself from a lot of the people I used to call friends to focus on what I saw as important and as a duty. I feel responsible that a lot of my relationships with the senior class were all but cut off. I felt like no one cared to come look for me to hang out, even when they did, and that every little thing someone said was a personal attack. And because I was living away from home now, all my friends from Newton, Pope, etc., they seemed really distant too. I was alone, despite being in a dorm filled with kids I cared deeply about and did my best to help keep happy, even when I wasn't happy with myself. And I feel like I'm often at a loss for words here. I feel left behind, but not being popular at school isn't what this one's about. Trust me, it's the last thing on my mind. But this loneliness was the move that set me up to be really vulnerable for the shot to my Achilles heel. My brother. Now, I've never brought him up in a speech or anything really before because I feel people can view him as a circumstance. And this isn't how I want him to be known. I'm sure you know Midge, but John Baton is my older brother, and he's the most perfect person I know. He's my hero. He's near sinless, and he's a source of inspiration for a lot of people, but being that perfect means he's got a different cross to carry, right? Well, he does. SMA. Spinal muscular atrophy. They left him in a wheelchair with no muscle function, on a ventilator, and a life expectancy at birth of about 2 years. Well, my folks have all but exhausted their lives to keep him alive to 20 so far. One of the oldest with his case, and he needs 24-hour care. And the nurses that usually helped us had all left, and my mom was doing this all by herself now. I couldn't even help her at all. And so I was hearing news of her suffering and breaking more and more from a cell phone that sometimes I felt too worried about to pick up when it rang. And on one of the days I answered, I learned that John was ill. Really ill. Sepsis, seizures, rushed to the ER, in a coma. So I did what I did with all of this. Followed it up, I smiled, and told everybody, like Jenna Faust, who was about 3 feet away from me when I got that phone call, that everything was fine. I didn't want to bring anybody else down as I spiraled. I was in a serious case of depression, knowing that my mother was being tormented and wouldn't leave John's side as he came in and out of consciousness for almost 2 months. Doctors and family told me to fear the worst, and I was mentally preparing for constant bad news because I was powerless. So I just tried to do my jobs to make people a little bit happier so I could try and ease the pain a little for myself, you know, just study and be a prefect. And there were times I felt like those two weren't holding up. I wasn't living up to expectations. God, I was going to vomit. And then came the Freeman Funk, so I did, until there was nothing but bile in my gut and in my heart. And then show after show after show, and then stress. And I just thought people were sometimes acting like my friends at this point. Well, my grades slipped and my whole world tripped up and fell into black waters down past the senior fall, and winter froze me underneath that surface. I couldn't even calculate the roots of the problem because my TI-89 was broken, and asked Mr. Eldorian, I am bad at calculus. Room 205 was sometimes uncomfortable silence because I didn't know what to say, because even with the roommates, sometimes I felt alone. But you know, through all of this, my Uncle Joey used to come over and tell me, oh, I'm so proud of you, Chris. You're up there with all them. You're doing fantastic things. You just keep going. And then Joey died. And you know those safety nets that they always tell you got? Well, string after string after string was cut. I felt like I was going to drop 6 stories down on the concrete. It was finally too much weight for this Renaissance man, Chris, I tell people not to think of me as. That this talented Chris couldn't live up to this image on the pedestal that I never wanted to be on. And I know some people don't like that image, but I'm just Chris. You know, God damn it, I wanted to fix things, but nothing was working. So when spring break came, I was broken. Silent. I know, I finally shut up. So I tried to fix my troubled mind. So I walked the dog. And in that tranquility, my thoughts took me for a whirl. I contemplated all of it, and I realized how I was doing things was all wrong. You see, I couldn't just wish for change. In the wise, oftentimes brash words of my grandpa, you know, wish in one hand, shit in the other, see which one gets filled first. So I took his advice. I began to change things, and in that process, I began to change. And I realized things weren't bad. In fact, they were the best they'd ever been. You see, I was just spinning this year in a negative way because I had let a few minor negative things occur into a brain that is notorious for overthinking things, snowball effect, into making this whole year trash. You know, I was really the only obstacle making this year seem bad. I needed to overcome my own negativity. I needed to face Chris in the mirror, and I needed to change his mind. So I thought about it in the cool pre-spring air of March with my dog. And I reminded myself of the amazing things that happened this year. And it started out small. And it's going to seem trivial, but a buddy of mine from home, Logan Siesta, someone who I've always called my best friend, almost a brother, got me a Christmas gift. Dr. Pepper and some calendar he made in graphic design, expecting nothing in return. And because of that, I remembered my friends from home came to visit me up here a lot. And they went out of their way to see me, which really means the world to me. And it was only after that that I saw the love that I had here too. And this might even sound more ridiculous, but Mr. Raz, of all people, reminded me of this. He was the only person who saw through my fake smiles and saw the real change in my demeanor. And there was one time I was walking, and he asked me at random if I was okay, knowing I wasn't, when John was ill. And it was the first time that I genuinely cried in a very long time. So thank you for giving me solace and helping me realize I didn't have to carry this kind of weight alone. I watched little Midgie over here grow out of his shell, and I became the most proud a brother could ever be to see little Matthew become the wonderful, outgoing kid he made himself into this year. It was when little Grace Rayer ran down the hall to show me a ski medal she won. It was when Luigi a Deep Biddle and I would go to the Pagato Advisi dinners. When Spencer Quinn wanted to show me a magic trick he was working on. When A-Rob came to me for advice at 1 a.m. When Zedric and I sang along to A Wonderful World by Sam Cooke. When Carter and I took a walk through Blairstown. When Pinkerton and I watched Rick and Morty while Danny's sister would keeping me up laughing my ass off all night. When Filthy Frank, Paul, and I went down to a diner breakfast. When John Manning and I played FIFA. When Beans, Chaya, Demar would write raps, and Matt Vinci jumped into my arms after he accomplished probably the biggest goal of his whole year, kissing Callie Toll. Parlapiano would just be in my room waiting for me, in the dark, for like an hour and a half. When Jason Pan's 3 whole words of the day made mine a little brighter. And hell, even when Nick Moscow asked me to help him write his prefect application. That I felt this sublime, wickedly satisfying sense of happiness that I've never felt before. And it's best emulated when I read this. Chris, thanks for being so awesome and making me feel like I'm significant. You're the best big brother ever. Dilsher. So John improved dramatically the week before we returned from break, and he finally came home. And I got accepted to one of my first choice colleges, too. My parents were proud, so to celebrate, I went out with a lot of close friends that weekend. I was healing. That hole I had dug myself into was filled, and as I stepped out, I still had a lot more to say. I mean, I could go on and on about my advisor, the Antonellis, Strauss and Coach Cam's duty nights with me, the football, the play, prefecting with Neil, Mike, and Rickmo, but I'd be here longer than I already am. But there's a few morals I took from all this. One, it was the people in my life were what made this year, and my whole life, so special. From the kids that I prefected in Freeman Hall to my friends and family that stuck through it with me. But I thank you a lot. 2, it wasn't what happened to me that defined me as who I am. It's what I did with what happened to me. Every success and every stumble and fall brought me here, and I love myself for it, and I'm better for it. And so I hope you learned a little bit about me before we part ways, because, well, I know I did. And lastly, 3, it's just crazy how your perspective can make something that was the worst become the best, you know? We are partly in control of this same seemingly untamable beast called destiny. And there is some balance to the 2 partners on each side of the dog leash that walk together. You and life. If you just let life take you, there's a very slim chance you're going to be where you want at the end of the journey. But if you keep trying to control everything, life's not going to respond positively. You need to bring balance to succeed. You need to change the things you can, accept the things you can't, and be able to know the difference between the 2. Thank you.
As a senior in high school, going off into the real world, I'm scared. I'm scared of failure, death, the future, and all of those other big existential fears. But my biggest fear is the same as it's always been. I'm deathly afraid of potatoes. I wish that was a joke. Everyone has their irrational fear, and this is mine. It all stemmed from my neighbor Riley. When I was 3 years old, I moved next door to this little twerp. And for the 8 years that I lived next to him, he always smelled distinctly of potatoes. It wasn't like his breath just smelled like potatoes. Oh no. This kid smelled as though he'd taken long baths in potatoes and then washed his hair with potato paste before going out to smoke some potatoes. This kid is my worst nightmare. He spent what seemed like every waking moment chasing me around. And for those of you who know me, I'm not very athletic and I hate running. But I swear, I ran like the wind when his stench was chasing me. Now, many of you won't see my phobia as a problem. You might be saying, oh cool, she doesn't eat potatoes. But how does that really negatively affect her life? If anything, it seems like cutting out unhealthy foods like French fries would really help her in the long run. But you would be wrong. My fear of potatoes has kept me from fully developing socially. When my friends sit around laughing or reminiscing over a basket of fries, it takes all of my willpower to keep myself from running away from these crusty, yellow-brown sticks laying in their greasy plastic bowls with their burnt, sweaty odors wafting through the air. As a 17-year-old, I can go from a functioning member of society to a non-functional little kid in a matter of seconds when I'm confronted with my kryptonite. When I first got to Blair, I didn't feel like potatoes were my biggest issue. Instead, I was scared of meeting new people or failing out of school. Stupid, I know. But eventually, at a place like Blair, I realized that I don't have to be afraid of the community. So I went back to being afraid of potatoes, because everything else isn't really that scary at all. This change definitely didn't happen overnight, but by the ski season pre-team trip, it was clear that my fear of potatoes had reemerged back and better than ever. At lunch at one of the ski lodges, after a day of wiping out on bunny hills, somehow people found out about my weird relationship with potatoes, and a teammate jokingly tossed a fry at me. This fry proceeded to fall directly down my shirt. I felt my skin crawl as the waxy starch touched me. I frantically yelled at Gabby Gunther, a senior I had never talked to get the fry out! When she justifiably refused, I proceeded to do a headstand so the fry would fall out of my shirt without infecting my hands with its grease. In that moment, I wasn't afraid of talking to new people, because I was surrounded by a team of people I would have never interacted with otherwise. And I wasn't afraid of failure, because I was on the ski team, even though, in all honesty, I have no idea how to ski. In that moment, the only thing that scared me was that repulsive puke yellow fry that had found a new home in my shirt. After overcoming this fry, I knew I could take on the world. Later in the year, I even got up in front of my entire grade and gave a speech about how sometimes I forget how to speak English. And one time, during my freshman year, this failure to speak coherently made it sound like I was hitting on my English teacher. I don't really know why I chose to share this specific moment, but it speaks to the fact that I'm not afraid to share even the more awkward parts of myself with all of you. Now, I'm sure everyone in this room has their own fears. Typical fears like those of heights, spiders, clowns, or weird fears like those of food groups, crocs, people who bite into string cheese, and everything in between. But believe it or not, I feel like these silly fears help us move forward in our lives. Like what happened to me in the ski lodge, these fears can help break down the social barriers of yelling at girls to get food out of your shirt, doing headstands in dining rooms, giving weird speeches, or whatever situation you might find yourself in. At Blair, I don't have to be scared of a teacher calling on me when I don't know the answer, the often uncooked meat in the dining hall, or even filming my leadership story. And now, before you get any crazy ideas about chasing me around campus with a fistful of that white greeny gook that you all call mashed potatoes, or trying to convince me that gnocchi is just fat pasta, then I should totally try some. This isn't to say that we should all go out and overcome everything we're scared of, because honestly, that sounds impossible. I may never be able to sit next to a potato without my stomach starting to churn and my life flashing before my eyes. But no matter what problems I may face in the next 4 years, or even the rest of my life, I know that everything will be okay, because I've had to overcome my biggest fear every time I step into the dining hall. Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Good evening. My grandmother always reminds me that prior to my birth, she and my pregnant mother attended a Sunday morning church service. At the conclusion of that service, my mother decided to receive prayer, and in the midst of the pastor praying upon my mother, she touched my mother's stomach and said to her that the child within her womb would be a preacher. Prior to the start of my own journey, there was a prophecy that someday I would be a preacher. While in the womb, it appears that God was telling my mother that the path of my life was set. It appears that God was telling my mother, you will give birth to a preacher, a vessel of my word. The journey began February the 11th, 1998, and 18 years of my life seems to have happened in an instant, but as I reflect upon the past, live in the present, and set expectations for the future, I consider the journey that has brought me thus far and molded me into the young man that I am today. I was the son of a single mother who always worked hard to ensure that there was food in my mouth, clothes on my back, and shoes on my feet. My mother was a God-fearing woman who always believed that God would make a way when there was no way. But there were also multiple instances in my childhood in which I saw a God-fearing woman weep and wonder where God was in the midst of our pain. I asked God, why was a woman who gave birth to a predestined preacher, a vessel of your word, faced with such adversity? Around the age of 12, I decided to seek God and truly strengthen my faith to better understand the path that God had for my life. Throughout middle school, I embraced a lesson my mother always taught me: be a leader and not a follower. So I worked hard to ensure that my actions reflected a determination to establish my own identity and not reflect the status quo or reflect the desire to fit in with the rest of the pack. I sought God, and as I attempted to be a leader and not a follower, I realized my friends were fading. People disliked me and criticized me at every opportunity that they had. I asked God, why was a predestined preacher criticized and ridiculed for attempting to live in his own skin? As I question God in search of a reason as to why the obstacles I've heard of thus far ever existed, I consider some of God's people in the Bible, and I consider the journey that they took throughout their lives. I consider the journey of Job. An excerpt from the book of Job, chapter 1. The Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil." "Does he fear God for nothing?" Satan replied. "Have you not placed a hedge around him and his household and everything he has? You have blessed the work of his hands so that his flocks and herds are spread throughout the land. But now stretch out your hand and strike everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face." The Lord said to Satan, "Very well then, everything he has is in your power, but on the man himself do not lay a finger." An excerpt from the book of Job, chapter 2. Then Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and afflicted Job with painful sores, from the soles of his feet to the crowns of his head. Then Job took a piece of broken pottery and scraped himself with it as he sat among the ashes. And his wife said to him, "Are you still maintaining your integrity? Curse God and die." He replied, "You are talking like a foolish woman. Shall we accept good from God and not trouble?" Job, in the midst of all that he was experiencing in his life, states, "Shall we accept good from God and not trouble?" I consider Job when I consider all that I've experienced in my life, because Job reminds me that if we expect goodness to exist in our lives, we must first expect trials, tribulations, and temptations to exist in our lives. Wondering why my mother was faced with such adversity throughout my childhood, I'm reminded that if we expect victory and success, we must first expect adversity and distress. Wondering why I was faced with such adversity throughout my middle school years, I'm reminded if we expect victory and success, we must first expect adversity and distress. When I consider the prophecy of the pastor who prayed over my mother while I was in the womb, I understand that God was telling my mother that she would give birth to a preacher. But I also understand that God was telling my mother that the path of my life would consist of days of distress, months of misery, and years of yearning for change. The journey I've taken thus far has been far from smooth and instead rough, far from straight and instead crooked. But my persistent faith that there was a light at the end of the tunnel has carried me thus far. I'm not nearly as righteous as Job was. I constantly sin and make mistakes. I haven't experienced the adversity that Job experienced. I've only walked in the path that God has for my life for 18 years. But like Job, I've never given up on God's plan for my life and remained persistent in my faith, although in my darkest days, I am driven to believe that God simply doesn't exist, and if he did, he would show me a sign of deliverance. As I question God about the path that he has for my life, I not only draw solace from the story of Job, but I'm reminded that Proverbs 3:5 states, "Trust in the Lord and lean not on your own understanding." Hebrews 11:1 states, "Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen." And Philippians 4:13 states, "I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me." Let me share a story with you by Mary Stevenson that illustrates trust in faith. One night I dreamed a dream as I walked along the beach with my Lord. Across the dark sky flashed scenes from my life. For each scene, there was two sets of footprints, one belonging to me and one belonging to my Lord. After the last scene of my life flashed before me, I looked back at the footprints in the sand. I noticed along the path of my life, especially at the very lowest and saddest times, there was only one set of footprints. This really troubled me, so I asked the Lord about it. "Lord, you said that once I decided to follow you, you'd walk with me all the way." But I noticed along the path of my life, at the most troublesome and saddest times, there was only one set of footprints. I don't understand why, when I needed you the most, you would leave me. He whispered, "My precious child, I love you and will never leave you. Never, ever during your trials and testings. When you saw only one set of footprints, it was then that I carried you." As I stand before you today, I'm truly blessed to say that I am a member of the Blair Academy community. And I'm truly blessed to say that I've been able to spend 4 years away from home while obtaining a superb education, obtaining opportunities that were once unavailable, and creating meaningful, and in some instances, relationships with my fellow faculty and my fellow peers. As I stand before you today, I realize that the prophecy over my life while I was in the womb is true. Because here on campus, I'm not only known as Will Pemberton, but I'm also known as the preacher man, the pastor, or the reverend. Many years ago, as I traveled along my journey, I never imagined I'd be 12 hours away from home, 9 months out of the year. I never imagined I'd be a member of Mr. Moore's squash program. I never imagined I'd be a member of Mr. Razz's technical crew for 4 consecutive spring seasons. I never imagined I'd be Mr. Goggins' prefect in Lakeside Hall. I never imagined I'd be Mr. Patton's advisee. I never imagined I'd habitually visit Mr. Winter's kitchen on Monday nights for pancakes. And I never imagined I'd create so many meaningful friendships that would endure long after my departure from Blair. Many years ago, as I traveled along my journey, I never imagined I'd spend 4 of the best years of my life here at Blair Academy and stand before you as a 4-year Blair Academy senior. Many years ago, as I traveled along my journey, I never imagined I'd be where I am, but I always had faith that God would and will continue to orchestrate my steps. Thank you.